Thank you everybody for joining me today. We are here in Granite Podcast Studio in Newry for this episode of Activist Lawyer, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by India Fahy. Hi India.
Oh, hi Sarah, so pleased to be here.
Great, and you flew in from London. You're heading back tomorrow. It's just a quick visit.
A fly-in visit home.
Well, look, we'll chat more about that in a second, but just for our listeners, a little bit of background about you. India is an associate in Brian Cave Leighton Paisner LLP's competition litigation team in London. Outside of work, India is secretary of the London Irish Lawyers Association, a professional organisation for lawyers based in London with an affinity to the island of Ireland. India has been a supporter of and advocate for the Integrated Education Fund for more than 10 years. The IEF is an independent charitable foundation which has been supporting the growth and development of integrated education in Northern Ireland for 30 years. India was also one of the founders of Integrated Alum NI, I think I've pronounced it correctly, in 2013, a registered charity which serves as a network for past pupils of integrated schools and seeks to promote the integrated education movement by propelling the voice of those who know firsthand the benefits of integrated education. India, again, thank you so much for joining us here.
Pleasure.
Well, we'll get to all of your fantastic work around integrated education, which is primarily what we'll focus on today, but do you mind taking us through a little bit about your journey into law, like all of our guests?
Sure.
And how you ended up in London.
Absolutely. So my dad's side of the family are all lawyers, got a mix of criminal family.
Wow.
And I wanted to be a lawyer from I was no height.
Born.
I think I did a drawing when I was 4 of me in a suit in a courtroom. It was quite sad, really.
Do you still have that drawing?
I do still have that drawing. But yeah, so I always wanted to be a lawyer, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to go away, wanted to leave Northern Ireland for university, just to see the rest of the world and see what was out there. But I really didn't want to do the law national aptitude test. So I applied to LSE, which didn't have the test, and that was me set on a journey to London. So I studied law for my undergraduate, and I actually never really saw the appeal of corporate law until I got to London, but was really interested in it and really liked the idea of a training contract. Of course. Because it gave you the option to move around, paid experience and to get to move around 4 different departments and see what you like and see what you don't like. So I ended up very lucky. I applied for a training contract at BCLP and was accepted, so I didn't go through the ordeal that most people go through, most students go through, trying to get a training contract, so I was very lucky.
You were, that's brilliant. And your current role now, it's competition law?
Yeah, competition litigation. So
very good.
I'm coming up to 4 years qualified. But that was a case of a benefit of a training contract. I got involved in a case in one of my seats of my training contract, fell in love with it and decided it was what I definitely wanted to do. And I've been there since, so it's great.
Brilliant, and you're really enjoying it. We had a wee chat there, and it's great. London has a great community as well and a great vibe.
Great buzz about it, it's great.
And just, you're very much involved as well. We mentioned there with other Irish lawyers, and you've recently been reappointed the secretary of the London Irish Lawyers Association.
Yeah.
How do you find that? And I mean, is that something that you rely on in terms of, do you ever get homesick? Or
I love it. I love any excuse to be around Irish people. I think, I'm biased, but I think we're better crack than everybody else.
Oh, yeah.
So I actually, I got the opportunity. I was contacted by Grania Mellon, who's also a lawyer in London, and we knew each other from the Washington Ireland programme, and she said, there's an association of Irish lawyers and they're appointing a new committee, you should get involved. And I actually joined the AGM as my first committee meeting, and got appointed, and I've just fallen in love with it. It's such a great organisation. We're able to organise different events, have great fun. And last week we had our inaugural St. Patrick's Day gala. So we had 160 Irish lawyers.
Wow, under the one roof.
under the one roof. And we had a traditional band.
Brilliant.
We had Tato crisps, we had Club Orange. No, it was brilliant. So it was black tie and in a fancy hotel, and we all got to dress up for the evening. So no, it's great. And it really is the perfect remedy for homesickness, because you're just surrounded by people who have all gone through the same experience, and all have Irish accents, which is very comforting.
And it's obviously the whole like it's north and south, a big mixture, and it's barristers, solicitors, everybody.
Exactly, and all in completely different areas of law, and based in different places.
Fantastic.
But it's great, and it's great to be able to support other young Irish lawyers. So we have a mentorship program.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, mentorship program, and setting up at the moment a trailblazer mooting competition program.
Brilliant.
So lots of outreach, which it's brilliant to be able to give back,
That really
and to be able
is.
to share with people how they can get in. And given that we've got lawyers in so many different areas, you can almost guarantee that we'll have someone who's got experience in the field that the young person's interested in. So it's great.
Brilliant. So great for networking and getting to know people, which is very important to law, especially depending on which area you're in. But I'd imagine younger people, how would they find out maybe about the mentorship program? Or
yes, we've got a website. So just I actually don't know what the website is.
we'll put it on our link, but it's something around Irish Lawyers London.
If you Google London Irish Lawyers Association, I'm sure we're the only result.
Well, that sounds absolutely fantastic and a great resource, and you obviously rely on that organisation as well for outside your work as well. But just what we're going to talk about a little bit here is your role as an advocate for something that I personally believe is so important and fundamental, and it has been spoken about quite recently again. It kind of has always been there on the agenda here in Northern Ireland, but it's very prominent at the moment, and that's integrated education. And you've been working on issues around integrated education for some time. How did you become involved in this? I suppose it's a campaign for integrated education in India.
Yeah, I'm lucky. It wasn't actually, I had nothing to do with getting involved in the first place. It was bold parents who set up one of the integrated schools that I went to. So I went to Oma Integrated Primary School, and then to Drumra Integrated Secondary School, and loved my experience of integrated education, and was very aware and very conscious of, because my parents spoke a lot about the benefits of integrated education. So I'm sure there are quite a lot of people who would tell you they'd come through integrated schools and never really known
That's
that they were integrated.
What did you know?
I think people must have different experiences of this, but my parents were big advocates of integrated education. My mum was on the Parents' Council, and so we spoke a lot about the benefits of integrated education at home, so I was always very conscious of it. But I loved my experience. So the IEF was actually involved while I was in Drumra Secondary School, was actually involved in supporting a legal challenge by the school to allow the school to expand. So the school has been oversubscribed for 2 decades, but the government was refusing to allow the school to expand to meet demand because it would take it would take pupils away from other schools in the area. And the IEF consistently supported both Oma Integrated Primary School and Drumra Secondary School by providing funding, helping the school to expand by providing mobile classrooms, and helping with the legal challenge. So I was very aware of how much work they did to help schools just like the school that I'd gone to. And when I moved to London, I was actually contacted by the IEF, who said they wanted to explore setting up something for alumni.
Right.
And whether that was going to be formal or informal. But I think they rightly wanted to harness the power of being able to have people who've been through integrated education and can really talk about the benefits of integrated education. So that was very informal to begin with. I was very lucky and got invited to dinners in the House of Lords and got to speak in Mansion House. And as a student, that was just
a brilliant experience.
Just eye-opening. It was fantastic. And then we set up what was initially called Integrated Education Alumni Association, but we decided it was a mouthful.
It is.
It's a mouthful, but was renamed when it was registered as a charity, Integrated Alum NI. And that's really, as you said when you were speaking about my background, that's really a charity that aims to sort of propel the voice of people who've been through integrated education, and also to provide sort of an equivalent network to that which you might have if you'd been, to an established school with some sort of established alumni network, and that didn't exist for integrated pupils. So
and that was just in 2013, wasn't
that
it?
Was just
not that long ago.
Not that long ago. And I've continued. So I'm no longer on the committee for integrated alumni, but I've continued to support the IEF with advocacy, which it's a real passion.
It really is a passion. I think it's so important to hear the voices of students who've been through it, because I don't know why, and maybe you can enlighten me later on this recording, but I do hear about it so much. Just even BBC Radio Ulster had covered a piece last week, and then I was in our local library and there was so much information around IEF, Integrated Education Fund, magazines and posters and all the rest. So you do see it, it's spoken about a lot, but we'll get into kind of the facts and figures in a little bit, but just in a general sense, why are we talking about this today? I mean, how important is integrated education in Northern Ireland? And I'm sure some listeners who aren't from here that are tuning in are thinking, well, what's this about? Can you take us through maybe even just your own personal opinion on why this is so important and why you believe it's a good cause to get behind?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely biased because my answer to is it important is absolutely. But I think when you speak to people outside of Northern Ireland, and actually some people within Northern Ireland, people are really shocked to hear that more than 90% of school children in Northern Ireland still go to segregated schools.
Segregated. And that's the word that really kind of, when I was reading up a little bit, it really jarred me. And I was thinking, God, that is the word that we're still using. It's segregated schools.
And, that's the reality. Yeah. And, I'm sure, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all, and I don't mean to cause any offence to those schools. I'm sure they're all great schools. But, it is segregated education. You still have, Catholic education and Protestant education, and you still have young people who have very few interactions with people from a community that's different to theirs. And I just personally feel that we'll never leave behind the division in Northern Ireland until young people are educated together. I mean, I always think about it in terms of human nature. What drives the type of political division and religious division that we've had in Northern Ireland, and it's really sort of the concept of us and them. If you think of someone from a different community as not like you, it's very easy to fear or to dislike or to resent that other community. Whereas I find it very hard to imagine young people who've been educated together feeling anywhere near the same intensity of sectarianism or fear. But I mean, it really depends. I think it's very important for that integration to start as early as possible. Absolutely. At nursery age. Or
because
primary
it
school.
could get lost otherwise, and sometimes
Exactly.
it might be too late where people have already felt the division and maybe acted upon that at a later stage. And even it's funny how you hear young people, I haven't heard it in a long time because I'm no longer a young person, but I do remember people saying things like, I've never actually met a Catholic, or I've never actually met a Protestant, and you were thinking, oh my goodness. And then you start to think to yourself, well, we didn't really engage with other schools, or even apart from your own school being one religion, you don't mix with other schools very much.
But it's everything, because it's also community-based schooling. So if your school is in the same part of town that you grew up in, and your friends all live in the same area, and you play sports outside of school in the same area, and in the case of OMA, I mean, you even had, when you got to the age where you could legally drink, you even had different bars, different areas of town where people live their lives.
You just kind of automatically knew.
Exactly. And I always come back to thinking about various different conversations, and these are all sort of stylized rather than quoting people. But I've had so many conversations with people where they would say, oh, I hate Protestants, and this is in an integrated school, and I'd say, but your best friend's a Protestant, and then they'd say, oh yeah, but they're grand. And I'd say, and what about such and such? Oh yeah, they're grand as well. And it's like, is it every Protestant you know?
God almighty. It's so unique to hear. And on that, I mean, you haven't lived in London as well, and I know I've a lot of family in London. There are Catholic schools in London. My husband used to teach in one, and there are denominated schools. But the problem is very specific to here, because even those schools, you'd hear people in London saying, oh yeah, my child goes to the local school, and they'll throw in it's a Catholic school, but that child might not necessarily be Catholic, and the religion doesn't really attach to it.
It's quite
as
different.
Much, isn't it? So how is it different? I think America and different countries are the same. Am I right? Or it's just kind of
no. I think that's a very fair point. I think it is a problem that's specific to Northern Ireland, and I think it's really because you don't have the history in other countries of the division that existed and that ultimately led to the Troubles. And thankfully the peace process has been an enormous success, and I like to believe that the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland want to protect that. And I think in order to do that, we have to recognise that we can't segregate people in a way that doesn't go on to influence, how they perceive people in the opposite community.
No, it's absolutely fundamental, and we'll go on to talk about the support as well for integrated education. But just can you paint us a picture at the moment, just maybe in terms of what are we looking at in terms of stats or figures here, just to give some context?
Yeah, so I was actually looking at some stats just before coming on, and I was actually I thought it'd be interesting to just do a comparison between the year that I started in Oma Integrated Primary and where we are today. And I personally, I mean, maybe this is being a bit pessimistic, but I personally feel we should have seen a lot more growth than we've actually seen. So you had 12,000 pupils in integrated education in 94 and 27,000 pupils in integrated education today. And you had 43 schools in 94 and 70 schools today. Now, I mean, it's impressive when you consider it in the context in which I think it needs to be put, and that is this progress has been achieved by grassroots activism. This is something that not only has not been supported by the government, but has actually been resisted.
Really?
So this has been an uphill battle by pioneering parents, local communities, and organisations like the Integrated Education Fund that have made this possible. So if you consider it in that context, I think the growth's really impressive.
Absolutely.
I think it's just, it is still sobering to come back to the fact that you've still got 90%. Like 90%, that's an overwhelming majority.
It is, but I can completely understand where you're coming from there without that support. I mean, that almost seemed like an impossible task to achieve. And I know in certain areas of Northern Ireland that would have been, even to bring up the conversation, would have been extremely difficult, and the hostility that those activists would have faced would have been something else.
Unbelievable. But, Oma Integrated Primary started with 32 pupils in a mobile classroom. That's, and I mean, Drumra, while I was there, was in a Victorian psychiatric hospital.
Wow.
So, until we eventually, with the IEF support, secured funding for what was actually, it's an incredible building, and it's actually the only nursery, primary and secondary school on a single integrated campus in Oma now. But, that wasn't how it started. No. And it's a very brave and selfless decision, actually, to send your child, age 4, to a school that is currently in a mobile classroom without any funding. And, it's only with parents demanding better for their children that the integrated movement's been able to get anywhere near to where we are today. But, I mean, there's you can come back to government failure. And I would call it government failure, but that's not the official line. That's my personal view. But the Good Friday Agreement enshrined an obligation on the government to foster integrated education. I don't think that obligation was fulfilled. And Kelly Armstrong, MLA from the Alliance Party, very bravely tabled a private members bill, which was passed into legislation last year, the Integrated Education Act. And that's a really, really monumental development in the integrated movement, because what it does is it puts the onus and the initiative on the Department of Education to actually promote growth for integrated education. And you haven't had that requirement for the government to actively promote integrated education.
Really?
And
God, that's
I know,
shocking.
It's incredible. I know. Really interesting to see how the political parties each responded to that bill. And it had support from all of the nationalist parties. The DUP and the TUV tried to exercise a petition of concern and put fairly heavy pressure actually on the UUP to do the same. The UUP resisted that pressure, still opposed the bill, but didn't exercise the petition of concern, meaning that it passed into legislation. So even today, that is the definition of an uphill battle.
It is.
Yeah.
So there is kickback, in inverted commas, if we want to call it that. And we've had so many secretaries for state for Northern Ireland coming in and out, and they all, I was just reading of it, they're so supportive and also quite shocked because maybe none of them, I'm not saying none of them, but some of them may not know very much about this little part of the world. Yeah. And then they're landed with this job and they're like, what? Segregated schools at 90%, which is quite startling. And recently didn't Ireland's president, so Michael D. Higgins, Higgins also very publicly expressed his disappointment in this lack of progress. And like you just referred to there, the aspirations of the Good Friday Agreement, he also mentioned that shamefully education, these are his words, education remains overwhelmingly segregated. And mentioned there the Secretary for State of Northern Ireland had announced additional funding for schools who wish to become integrated. So there seems to be strong political will on the ground. The grassroots organisations, community activists still continue to do their job. But I would imagine, and maybe I'm just naive, that there is, a desire for this to be a success and to develop that little bit faster than it is. So how can we move things along, and maybe why aren't they being moved along as we'd like to see it?
I think it's really difficult, because I think the answer to that is institutional resistance, and that's the reason that we haven't seen enormous growth. Because if integrated education was expanding in line with demand, I believe that 90% statistic would be an entirely different statistic. But you've got this institutional resistance, and I think you've got a real perception that integrated education is a threat to the churches.
Okay.
And I think that's not really warranted, actually. I think sometimes people like to misconstrue the aim of the integrated education movement as being to try and do away with all segregated schools, to try and have only integrated schools. I mean, I speak for myself, but I think I speak for others involved in the movement when I say I've never wanted to go against the will of what people want.
No.
And I think the ask's a really simple one, and I think when you put it in these terms, and I think we should speak about it in these terms, it becomes less of a threat and should be perceived as less of a threat. I will be happy that our work is done if every parent that chooses to be brave and send their child to an integrated school is given a place in an integrated school. So when supply and demand meet, that's me happy. I don't think that we should be shoving integrated education down people's throats. And the reality is, I mean, I mentioned that Drumra has been heavily oversubscribed for the last 2 decades, but it is true that 25% of first preference applications to secondary education are refused. So 25% of parents who make the bold decision to apply and use their first preference to send their child to an integrated secondary school are refused a place. Wow. That's enormous demand. I mean, it's hard to put an exact figure on it, but it sort of varies from between 750 to 1,000 pupils a year who wanted to go to integrated schools and weren't able to go to integrated schools. So that demand is very obviously there, but no one's ever been able to measure it. And part of the Integrated Education Act, and I actually think a really fundamental part of it, is it puts an obligation on the Department of Education to find a way to accurately measure that demand. So what we don't know what form that will take yet, because each one's slightly crude. The stats that I've just given you only apply to secondary schools, so it doesn't tell you anything about primary schools and nurseries. But what it also misses or leaves out is I was head girl at Drumra, and in the year that I was head girl, I must have had 5 or 6 instances of parents coming up to me in the street and saying, I wanted to send my child to the integrated, but I heard the integrated is oversubscribed. And the other schools don't take it well if you don't put them down as your first preference.
Typical.
So you actually get, what we don't know is how many parents would have, if they knew that they could secure a place, how many parents would have opted to send their child to an integrated school. And so it'd be really interesting.
It would be really interesting. So you can't really encapsulate that data accurately. I wonder about, is there, this sounds a bit simplistic, but a survey even for, would that be, how would that work?
Well, it's difficult because you never know with a survey. I think it's very hard. It'll vary from area to area.
Sure.
These are all quite crude ways of thinking about things, but it'll be really interesting to see what the Department of Education does with that.
And the obligations on them to, that's brilliant for the first time.
Absolutely, and it's got the support of the Integrated Education Fund in advising on, what they know. So they had the Lucid Talk survey in 2021, and there's actually another survey that the results will be coming out this year. But in 2021, they had 71% of people surveyed said they would send their child to an integrated school. That's big. And 64% of people, when asked why has progress been so slow, cited the political parties, and 64% cited resistance from the church. So it's my view shared by others, clearly.
It is shared by others. It's certainly shared by me. And I know just hearing for me as well, it's not, it's just choice. It's about having that choice. And I envied a lot of my peers and my friends who live in the south, where they were able to send their child to an educate together school. And, I think like a lot of I don't know if it's across every county or anything, it can be difficult to get into them. And again, being oversubscribed is an issue. But in general, anybody that I know who opted to send their child did secure a place. And I used to just be slightly envious of that, like having that choice there, which just doesn't exist here. And I know there are different types of schools. I know there are bun schools and different schools that might fall outside the kind of normal segregated type of school. But I think you're right. It's about having that choice there, not forcing it upon people. And if it's worded, well, that's not even worded. This is, you're presenting it in a factual way, that people shouldn't feel threatened by it. But if they don't choose to send their child there, that's fine. There should be other options. But it's about having choice at the end of the day. But it's so interesting to hear the demand there. I'm really interested to find out more about that.
I know. I can't wait to hear how they measure it, because it will be really interesting to hear. And I think it'll be quite a reality check, actually, for the Department of Education, because also that demand, that whatever measure they find for that demand, it's also going to need to take into account availability of integrated education. So, if you live in an area that doesn't have an integrated school, you can't measure that. You can't measure potential demand by looking only at applications to existing integrated schools, because you don't know that an area that doesn't have an integrated school,
what the demand is,
doesn't have plenty of parents that would like to send their child to an integrated school if one was available.
Yeah, and I mentioned to you before, back a long time ago, I moved from Dublin here, and I was thinking about schools for my first child, and I received a lot of kickback from even friends I brought it up with. They were just like, why? It's not even important. Why are you banging on about this? But when I looked into it a little bit more and I brought it to our local representatives as well, it did seem to be quite a complex process in place, and they kept bringing up the idea of a feasibility study that would, but even to get to that phase, I think you have to get some level of support or some questionnaire or something. How does it actually work if you did want to establish or even conduct a feasibility study for your area?
Yeah, so it's become a lot easier in recent times. So the IEF launched an Integrate My School campaign in 2019, which Liam Neeson kindly sent a video for, which attracted quite a lot of attention, which is great. But that whole campaign is aimed at making that process easier and making it clearer. And you've got sort of, everything down to tutorial videos of it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, taking you through the steps. But there are two ways that parents can begin the process of transforming an integrated school if you want to go down the transformation route, and I'll come back to other options. But the process of transformation can be started by the Board of Governors of the school at their own initiative, or it can be at the written request of 20% of parents. And the IEF can provide support in practical terms, in terms of how you go about doing that. You then have a legal process, and it is complex, but I think it has to be, because it's really incredibly important that there is parental buy-in.
Sure.
There's no, it comes back to this shoving integrated education down people's throats. There needs to be genuine parental support for an integrated ethos. Otherwise, even if you could get it off the ground, it just won't work. But that's as simple. So you then have a vote. You need 50% of parents to turn out in terms of actually voting, which I appreciate is a task of itself. But it's a simple majority, so 51%, and you vote to transform the school. So that's been fantastic, and it's been really successful. When I was preparing for this, actually, there were 9 schools who had positive parental votes and were waiting for a ministerial decision. Right. There's now 10.
Oh, there's 10. Wow. Very good.
So 95% of parents at Ballymena Nursery School, as announced today, voted to transform. So that's fantastic. And
that's
we got
brilliant.
got a congratulatory message from Liam Neeson.
Oh my
he's
God.
from Ballymena. So
that's a great. There's so many good news stories.
So many good news stories at the moment. And I think
brilliant.
that really helps to build momentum. And that is probably what's behind so much of the media attention that you've been seeing as well, is when things are going well and something's gaining real traction, you've got plenty of good news stories, which is really nice. But so you've got 10 schools waiting for a decision. quite how that decision will be taken in the absence of an executive is unknown. We're hopeful that that will all go through without any issues through the permanent secretary, but at the moment that's to be confirmed. But I mean, hopefully. It's fantastic to see so many transformations, and I think that is what we'll see in the main. I mean, we've got too many schools in Northern Ireland, if we're all honest with ourselves. So I think it's unlikely to be, new integrated
That's
schools.
what I was going to ask you. Yeah. Is there a likelihood of that happening? And particularly if the Secretary for State has, announced additional funding and all the rest, that funding obviously goes to places like the IEF to help them kind of guide schools along through the transformation process. But I was thinking, going forward, in areas where there aren't any integrated schools, would there be an option for a new school just to start as an integrated school? But
absolutely. When I say no new integrated schools, I mean more in terms of I don't think that'll be what brings us to having a huge number of integrated schools, because there just won't be that many new schools in Northern Ireland. But in terms of if you've got an area that doesn't have an integrated school and there's reason to have a new school, there's no formal process at the moment for that to be guaranteed to be an integrated school, and that comes back to the issue of parental choice and consent. So it's not the case that if there's a new school in an area, it would automatically be integrated at this point. But what the Integrated Education Act does do is provides for public consultations. So you'd have a consultation in that area about how many people would be prepared to buy into an integrated school. So it's just, I think, you'd like to be able to trust your government to show initiative and do these things themselves. But it's been shown time and time again that that's not always the case. And having those obligations in the Integrated Education Act, I think will really move this forward, because even if it's just a tick box, it's an exercise that they have to go through now. And provided there's parental demand, there's no reason why we shouldn't then see new integrated schools in those areas.
That's so interesting, and it's a big step forward, and lots of success stories as well that I hear, and obviously big high profile stars like Liam Neeson. When I think of integrated education, I do see his face. And we had Baroness May Blood. Sorry. I'll do that. We had Baroness May Blood as well. I've seen her, I know she fronts the magazine most recently as well. People have done extraordinary work behind the scenes, and I know in London there's actually huge support for this as well, and probably across the globe for people who lived in Northern Ireland and have travelled elsewhere would really see the benefits of supporting this campaign. But just in terms of looking back a little bit in time, there were planned integrated schools back in the 80s and 90s, I think, and Lagan College always springs to mind as one of the first, or maybe the first, integrated education school, secondary school. So India, I mean, we've just covered there some of the success stories and the stats and figures, which I'm really interested in, and I think it'll be so interesting to follow this going forward in terms of the Act and the support behind it. But what does, in your opinion, does the future look like? I mean, you're very positive about everything, and I know I loved that we went through the statistics there, and even though there's still a 90% figure there that schools remain segregated, the hard work that goes on behind the scenes in transforming those schools is phenomenal, really, and that has to be, celebrated in itself. So what does the future look like in terms of integrated education for Northern Ireland? Are there any plans for progress in the months and a year ahead?
So the IEF has its own ambitious target of 100 integrated schools by the end of 2025, which is, if you consider the amount of growth that we've seen that I mentioned from 1994, that's a real acceleration of progress. And they think that is entirely feasible, particularly through the transformation process. So I hope that'll be the case. I hope they'll meet that target. I think that we need to talk about it more. Yeah. And I think that people need to be more aware of it. And I think that actually we need to start having really frank discussions. I mean, I'm happy to debate with anyone on anything, but particularly this. I'm really interested in understanding why people don't want to send their children to integrated schools, because I think it's really important to listen to that and to take that into account. I don't think that we can just dismiss views of 90% of the population in terms of where they want to educate their children. But I think there's a lot of There's a lot of learning to be done by everyone. I often get the challenge, and I think it's a fair one in terms of people who are very protective of their culture. But I often get the criticism that with an integrated school, you're basically whitewashing everyone, and you're acting like everyone's the same, and we're not the same. And that's never how I've seen integrated education. And in fact, it's actually the opposite of the integrated ethos. The entire point of integrated education is to recognise difference and celebrate difference. So we celebrated every different, religious celebration that you could find in the diary. And it's about actually being respectful enough to recognise that, someone that you're in class with is different to you and they have different traditions. And that doesn't mean that you have to go along with that or even have to actively participate, but you have to recognise it and respect it. And I think that's really important. So I think that conversation needs to keep happening. I think we need to keep putting pressure on political parties to recognise, even if people don't get behind, I personally don't care how we achieve widespread integrated education. I don't mind if it's virtuous reasons or practical reasons, but some really difficult conversations need to be had about the economics of this. I mean, you can't have too many schools in an area undersubscribed just because you want to preserve segregated education. That is a fundamental waste of taxpayers' money. And so I think we need to start having conversations around all the different facets of this, the emotional side, but also the pragmatic side of how do we move forward with an education system that has too many schools and communities that don't have, the option of a school and are travelling to, towns nearby and all of the costs that are associated with that. And the IEF's leading lots of those discussions, which is great.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So I think it's pressure. I think it's harnessing all the momentum that we've got at the moment. And I think it's spreading the word really, and hopefully it'll just continue to go from strength to strength. But I am very positive.
You are very positive.
So I'm
but
sure
it's you're sharing your experience, and obviously working closely with the organisations involved in this for many, many years. You've great insight into it. But I really think your point there about engaging in discussion, I think that's where it has to start. And any big changes that we've seen in Ireland all started from people getting around the table. Any of the constitutional changes I'm talking about, even before a referendum took place, it was all about citizens' assemblies and people. And this is such a big issue that I think it would almost warrant something of that nature where, everybody is brought together from across all of the communities, and not even to listen firstly and just to see, what it's about, because you're right, we don't know that 90% of those people, we don't know what that's made up of. That could very much be people who attend segregated schools but really don't want to, or they don't want their children to. So we don't know what that 90% is made up of at all. So it would be so interesting just to hear people's opinions, but also, as you said, to ask them why do you want to go here, and to get people's genuine feedback and conduct, a study around that research. So that's really interesting that's going ahead, and IEF are leading the discussions in that sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And one thing that I find interesting and surprising is that actually support for integrated education when you survey young people is lower than than the general population. Still a clear majority, but it's lower. And I think it might have, I'm just speculating completely, but I think it might have to do with the fact that you're maybe a bit protective of the school that you're currently at, or your peers, or your teachers, or how that works. But the IEF's been participating in discussions. It's a scheme called Hungry for Change, and it's bringing together young people and canvassing their views. So I'm really excited for the survey results from Lucid Talk, which would be the equivalent of those 2021 surveys.
Right.
I'm also really interested just to hear all the feedback from all of those different community discussions, just so that we can really understand where resistance is coming from and what we can do.
And will that be published?
Yes.
I guess. And when's that likely to, do you know?
Later this year.
Later this year. Okay.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll get a bit more of an insight into where resistance is and how we can continue to change hearts and minds.
Fantastic. So, and anybody who wants to find out more, I guess the Integrated Education Fund website would be probably...
Yeah, so it's ief.org.uk.
Brilliant. And I did have a look on that, and it goes through everything. Really, the history,
it's fantastic.
The resources on that website are just fantastic. And it seems like a very approachable organisation anyway. So, I mean, if people did have concerns or questions, it seems like they're open to take any of that forward. So it's fantastic. And I'm glad to see this is funded. And just back to you then, yourself, India, I know your workload must be quite significant in London. How do you, because this is quite heavy as well, I'd imagine, and you're very passionate about it, very committed to it. How do you strike the balance? And the other wee question I kind of have is, we do have a lot of people on this show who work in corporate law, and they've kindly given up their time to discuss their journey as well. But very often, either in the workplace or outside, they're doing something else similar to you in terms of either advocacy or, doing a lot of pro bono work. How important is it to you, and I suppose it doesn't apply to anybody, to have a kind of a balance as such, and I don't like to put that on people, but this is activism, I guess, that you're involved in. How do you balance that with your job, which is quite corporate in a sense, or do you even think about that?
Yeah, no, it's not easy, and sometimes you beat yourself up a little bit, but I find that it's the nature of the job that you get really, really intensely busy periods where I have to put my hands up and say it's incredibly difficult to do anything outside of work. And, some of these things do end up falling by the wayside, but you do then get quieter periods where you're able to invest a bit more time. And the IEF they're great in terms of the people that they work with. They recognise that everyone has full-time jobs outside of it, and they completely appreciate that. So, at the moment, my involvement is very much just coming along and supporting them at events where I can, and speaking to potential donors if they're interested in understanding the experience of integrated education. So I have to say it's not a huge time commitment. It's more of sort of a passion side project. Yeah. But it's really important to me that I'm able to do these types of things outside of work. And, I'm really grateful that I have an employer that I'm currently on the clock, so that is supportive of people having interests outside of work.
That's brilliant.
And that's really important. I think I'd find it very difficult if I had an employer that didn't allow me to have that type of thing, that type of interest outside of work, because it's what eases your conscience.
Yeah. It eases your conscience. But as well as that, I suppose, finally, I'm guessing people listening here may be in the same position as you in terms of maybe they want to explore, studying abroad or working abroad. What advice or tips would you have for people who think, India's working in London, how do I get there, and how much support did you have around that? What tips do you have?
I would definitely look to just come back to the London Irish Lawyers Association. I don't actually know about other cities, but you'd be surprised how many organisations there are out there that welcome people reaching out. Yeah. I mean, I spoke to at least 2 or 3 people that were living and working in London as lawyers before I made the move. And it's a big move, and I wouldn't be shy about reaching out to people, because people remember, I mean, for me, it's not that long ago, but, people remember what it was like to leave Northern Ireland and move somewhere different, and how reassuring it is to have, people from home that can sort of guide you along the way. So I would just say, look for people who are doing something similar to what you're trying to do, and don't be shy, with reaching out. People never mind if they're not able to help because they're too busy or, something else. It's not like they'll mind you having reached out. Yeah. But it's quite a good way, I think, to get a flavour of what it is you're considering doing. But I'd also say pick something flexible that gives you like a training contract or equivalents in all different, areas of law, where you can try things, because some of the things that I thought I would like, I hated, and some of the things I thought I would hate, I do now and I love.
You hear that a lot, yeah.
You just don't know. I don't believe that you come out of the womb knowing that you want to be, a transactional lawyer.
You kind of knew you were going to be a lawyer, though, didn't you?
I think at that point my fate was decided. I do think it's important to try these things out, do as much work experience as possible. Even a week's work experience could be enough to go, I'm glad I tried it, but it's not for me.
Well, look, thank you so much for sharing your tips and advice there as well, and your journey, but also the fascinating work around integrated education. It is so important, and I really urge people to look up the Integrated Education Fund website and follow their work. It really is, fascinating stuff and really, really important. So thank you so much for joining me today, India.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. Thanks everyone for joining me today. If you like the show, please remember to share and leave a review if you have a moment. And you can also check out our website, www.activistlawyer.com, where you will see some blog articles written by our guests and contributors, as well as some fabulous Activist Lawyer merchandise.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service for our team, using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.